International Holocaust Memorial Day is the 27th of January, which of course was a day that Auschwitz was liberated. Last night I took part in an event which was called Creating Memories. It was an event put on by Nefesh B'Nefesh with the help of a remarkable man called Martin Hershkowitz, who's a second generation survivor. And his raison d'etre in putting on this program is that he has seen, like we all have, that the first generation eyewitnesses are dwindling in number, and very soon there won't be any. And he's taken it upon himself to try and perpetuate that memory throughout the generations. And of course, those of you who are familiar with any of the literature on Holocaust survivors will know that there's something called the long shadow of Hitler, and that the effects of the Holocaust don't just end with the survivors themselves, but the effects are very keenly felt and very severely felt in both the second and third generations, and possibly even fourth generations to come. It's important that this collective memory that this man, Martin Hershkowitz, is trying to establish is put forward. He's a poet as well as many other things, and he wrote a whole number of poems about the Holocaust and about creating memories for the Holocaust. And the program last night, I was invited to read one of his poems and to comment upon that poem. And I'd like to share with you the poem and my thoughts about that poem. So I'm going to try and share the screen with you now. It's called Protesting the Silence, Unknown / Unowned. If, as the rabbis say, each life has a meaning, then each death should have its meaning too. A tear, a shiver, a murmur of blessed memory after a name, even just a glimpse of a memory like the flicker of a lamp. But a death unmourned, unnoted, is a cruelty that should never have been created. It is a cruelty beyond flames, beyond dust. An incredibly powerful, incisive poem, which cuts to the heart of our history, that there are so many people who are unowned and unknown. Out of 6 million victims of the Shoah, quite amazingly, Yad Vashem has documented 4.7 million names of them in an attempt to prevent the tragedy that this deeply disturbing poem is describing. And that's quite an amazing feat. 4.7 million victims of the Holocaust have been named. But of course, that leaves 1.3 million who are unknown, unnamed, and, as the poem says, unowned victims. And it's to these tragic, unnamed korbanot that the poem refers, and it tears at our heart with its directness, its simplicity, its matter-of-factness about something, a subject, which is anything but matter-of-fact or mundane. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke about the idea of Chazal saying that Yaakov Avinu did not die. And clearly, on a physical level, he did die. He was embalmed and taken from Egypt to the land of Israel and was buried in Hebron. But what the rabbis meant was that Yaakov did not die because his legacy lived on. He passed the messages of his life, the lessons learned, the ethos of the family, the stories told to him by Yitzchak and the stories told from Avram to Yitzchak before him. These things that were important to him, he passed them on to the next generation. Through the chain of transmission, Yaakov lived on. The overwhelming tragedy of this most horrific event in the history of mankind is that inability to pass on the legacy, to pass on the memories, the traditions, the family stories, the lifestyles, the ethos, the value of the families onto the next generation. As Martin Hershkowitz's poem so clearly and incisively tells us, like a dagger to the heart, there are 1.3 million people. 1.3 million. Think about that number. That's more than the population of Birmingham. That's double the population of Manchester. That's 15% of the population of the entirety of Israel who have no legacy at all. They're just part of a terrible statistic. And as the poet puts it, they are unowned. And this is a cruelty beyond flames. So what can we do? What can we do? Well, the first thing we can do is we can support Yad Vashem, because the work that they're doing is tremendous. And it's unlikely, to be honest, though, that figure of 4.7 million names is going to be added to in any significant amount now. So all we can do is to remember those that are named, and to preserve their memory, and to own their memory, and to take them on board. And I want to tell you of a project which my son in Australia, who's a rabbi in Perth, has done. He started a boxing club for the members of his community. That's a little bit unusual to start with. Boxing rabbis are not all that common. However, that's not the point. He named the club the Victor Perez Memorial Boxing Club. And it was named after, obviously, Victor Perez. Let me try and show you the logo of his club. There it is. There's the logo of his club. And you can see there, it's called Victor Perez Memorial Boxing Club, Masoud Chai Ben Chaim, Hashem Yikom Damav. And there it is, Maccabi, Western Australia. And so who was this Victor Perez? Let me show you something else. Have a look at this. This is young Victor Perez. He was a Tunisian Jew who was a boxer, as you can see, and he rose to be a world champion. And he was murdered 76 years ago, last Friday, on the 22nd of January, 1945, on a death march from Auschwitz. And that photo that you can see on the screen now, that is him in his prime. And obviously, as you can see, the logo was taken from, the logo for the boxing club was taken from that picture. So that means that every child, every adult who joins the Victor Perez Memorial Boxing Club gets a little card with this picture on it. There are t-shirts available with a Victor Perez Memorial Boxing Club and his picture, Masoud Chai Ben Chaim, Hashem Yikom Damav. But more than that, they get a lecture. They get a lecture about who Victor was, where he came from, what he achieved, and how he was murdered. So this is what we can do. This is just one example of owning, taking ownership of a victim, taking ownership of a brother, a sister, somebody of our family, our extended family. I was fortunate that none of my immediate family suffered in the Holocaust. My family came to the UK well before that, so I don't have any personal connection. But I can take on board, I can take a victim, I can learn about that victim, I can try and find as much information about his family or her family and their lives and where they came from, and I can try and preserve that memory. That's what we can do. And some people ask, well, International Holocaust Day, what's it got to do with us? We've got Tisha B'Av, we've got Yom HaShoah, we've got Asara B'Tevet, which is another day where we commemorate the Kaddish HaKlali for those whose Yorktites we don't know. What do we need another thing for? What would we need International Holocaust Day for? I'll tell you why we need it. We need it because this is an international crime. This was an international crime. And this is something that the world needs to recall. And these victims, these unowned, these unnamed people deserve to be recognized internationally, because we know what happens when history isn't taken note of. We're doomed to repeat it again. So yes, let's commemorate International Holocaust Day by taking ownership, by taking on the memory of somebody who's not got a legacy of their own. Let's try and go onto Yad Vashem's website, find a person that maybe came from somewhere where your family came from. Find a person, learn about a person, learn about his family, learn about whatever you can about him, and preserve that memory for the next generations, because we're running out of time First generation survivors are few and far between now. The next generations have to take on this job. And Marty Hershkovitz, with his poems, and the one I read was only one of a number that he's written, is doing a fine job. We have to help. Let's make a creative memory for International Holocaust Day.